lovelies, and welcome to my very first Come Read a Chapter with Shannon. Today we will be reading Two for Roughing by Lasairiona McMaster. Now this is an arc, so it's a little sneak peek for you. It does come out on either the 12th or 13th of January, so if you like the sounds of this book after I read the first chapter, go pre-order this, and yeah, let's all get cozy. Get a blanket, get a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, a cup of hot chocolate, whatever, and let's dive on in. Prologue. Molly, 16 years old, 5 years earlier. To surviving another year of high school, Molly raised a can of Fanta in her favourite zero shits given koozie she'd stolen from her mum and crashed it against her best friend Savannah's hand. We survived? I feel like an extra on Walking Dead right now. Savannah smothered a yawn with her hand. Don't ask me to do any walking, cause no. The two girls were sprawled out on sun loungers in Molly's backyard next to the pool. It was the first day of summer, and their plans consisted of doing the bare minimum, working on their tans and consuming candy faster than their parents could provide it. Savannah slurped from her can, burped, giggled, and leaned back against the semi-reclined chair. Her waist-long blonde hair was twisted into a messy bun on top of her head. Reaching into the picnic-sized cooler next to her, Molly grabbed a handful of ice and ran it over her bare chest and neck. A sigh escaped her at the cool relief from the fierce overhead sun. "You kids have sunscreen on?" Molly's mum peeked round the back door of the house. Always the mother hen. "Yes, Mrs. Morrison." "Good. I'd rather not start summer vacation with sun blisters and sunstroke. Will's on his way home, Moll. We'll start lunch when he gets back." "Sounds good, Mum." "Want to swim before lunch?" Savannah was already shucking her Daisy Dukes to the ground and pulling off her tank top to reveal a bright yellow bikini. "Go ahead, I'll wait till after lunch." Molly pulled her shades from the top of her head and slipped them over her eyes before raking her long, fizzy brown hair off her sweaty neck and into a high ponytail. The unusual humidity wasn't doing much for her cascading waves. She peeled her short shorts off and dropped them over her phone on the hot ground next to her chair. "Wake up, sleepyhead!" Savannah sprayed her with a welcome dose of cool water from the pool as she climbed out and made her way back to her chair. "Girl, you were out cold, snoring. Drew, the lot. Pretty sure you farted in your sleep too." "Savannah, we both know my farts smell like gummy bears, so that stink must be coming from you." The gate to the backyard opened and Molly's big brother, only by 10 months, but he never let her forget it, made his way into the backyard, sweat-drenched shirt clinging to his body. "Mum, do we have time for a dip before we eat?" He was already kicking off his flip-flops and unbuttoning his shorts before their mum answered, 10 minutes, through the open window. Molly was only vaguely paying attention to her brother because he brought a friend, a guy she'd never seen before. His red hair shone in the sunlight. It was shaved on the sides but long and styled with gel on the top. His faded grey Minnesota Snow Pirate shirt stretched across broad shoulders and had dark rings of sweat around his neck and underarms. Will had always wanted to be a snow pirate since he learned what hockey was. If she was a betting woman, she'd put money on him striking up a conversation with the stranger over his shirt. Something cold against her thigh caused her to gasp and jump. "You're staring." Savannah's voice was quiet and close. She pulled her can away, tucked it back into the foam sleeve. "You can't see where my eyes are behind these shades," Molly hissed, throwing the comment back to Savannah, but she didn't divert her gaze. Savannah leaned closer. "Yes, but your chest stopped moving, so I needed to check that you were still alive." A braring laugh escaped Molly's mouth before she could clamp it shut. Whoever he was now standing in nothing but a pair of swim shorts, poised to jump in the pool. He hesitated and his eyes tracked to the sound of her ridiculous laugh. He was staring at her. Her body temperature seemed to have shot up 10 degrees. His stare was piercing, intense, and had her wishing she was already in the pool so she had an excuse to be closer to him. Idly dragging a thumb against her bottom lip, she willed herself to look away from the boys play wrestling in the pool. She had never been attracted to any of her brother's friends before. From an early age, they set up ground rules. She wouldn't mess around with any of his friends, and he would afford her the same courtesy. With any luck, this guy was only in town for the summer. Maybe he could be her summer fling, and Will wouldn't mind. Something about him pulled her towards him. He was still staring, throwing heated looks her way when Will's attention was elsewhere. He somehow managed to suck the oxygen from the space, despite the fact they were outside. "Lunch is ready." Molly didn't move from her mum's call. She was struck by an unusual barb of self-consciousness and didn't want whoever he was to see her body as she stood to put her shorts on. The boys got out of the pool, grabbed towels from the towel box and dried off. The new guy followed Will towards the house, pausing before he entered. He cast her a wicked grin that had her giddy parts reacting in a way they never reacted before, body tingling from top to toe. She stood on shaky legs and pulled her shorts on. Her chest was tight, her mouth dry, and her head light. Had she breathed at all in the last 10 minutes? She'd always been one to ridicule all the lip-biting, sighing and furtive gazes she'd seen on TV or read about in books. That shit never happened in real life. Except her brother had just brought home the most delicious man she'd ever seen, and she swooned so hard she stopped breathing. "Please let him be here just for summer." Will's voice permeated the air as Molly and Savannah walked towards the house. "Mom, this is Finn. He moved down the street about a month ago. We're going to be pirates together in college." Finnegan, 17 years old, 5 years earlier. "This watermelon salad is delicious, Mrs. Morrison. I don't even know what half of these ingredients are, but..." Finn shoveled another heaped forkful of what he hoped was watermelon salad into his mouth to stop his babbling, and made a satisfying sound. With little luck, a localised earthquake would strike right under his feet and suck him into the depths of the earth. "It's watermelon, cucumber, feta, red onion, mint, with olive oil and some balsamic vinegar." Will's sister was the one who answered, although she hadn't met his eyes since she'd come into the house. Her gaze had scorched him from the moment they arrived in the yard. Worse still, he had been drawn to her too. Her long dark hair was tied on her head, allowing the sharp edges of her cheekbones, jaw and nose to stand out on her pale skin. He couldn't see her eyes behind the shades, probably a blessing. If he had, he would have likely have come in Will's pool. Finn had moved to town just over a month ago. Will had found him playing street hockey in the cul-de-sac at the end of the street and asked to join in, making small talk over Finn's snow pirate shirt. Their relationship had started almost right away. Turned out they were in the same class at school, and when they weren't in class together, they were playing hockey together. One of the first things Will said to Finn was that his little sister was off limits. At the time, Finn had nodded his agreement. Younger sisters weren't cool. They were often clingy, needy, desperate to hang out with the cool kids. Finn had no plans to date his new bestie's little sister. But what Will had neglected to mention, however, was that she wasn't so little, and as Finn stood fighting the urge to reach out and stroke her collarbone, he realised he'd gotten it all wrong. She was most definitely the cool kid. He was desperate to hang out with her, and he'd already screwed himself over by giving his word he'd never touch her. Mercifully, the girls didn't linger. They piled their plates high with food and went back outside. When the door swung closed behind her, sadness settled in his stomach. The excitement and electricity throwing through the room left with her. He wanted to know everything there was to know about her. He wanted to make her laugh again, just so he could hear the obnoxious noise that delighted him the first time. She gave off an air of not giving a shit, and he was here for it. The brunette was Molly. Will scooped a mouthful of pasta salad into his mouth, chewed and swallowed, in case you couldn't tell. Finn's mouth dried up, and the watermelon salad suddenly felt like grains of sand against his tongue. He swallowed hard. "She's your only sister, right?" Phil snorted. "Yeah, I couldn't handle another Molly. Let's take our plates outside." He barely met the woman, and her orbit was already dragging him into torment and temptation. Could he sit across the yard from her and eat lunch as though he didn't want to lose himself kissing her? Aye. Food lodged in his throat and he coughed. "I should probably go home." Confusion tugged Will's brows together. After we eat? Had Finn eaten something he was allergic to? His tongue was thick and heavy, and words seemed to evade him, so he settled for a nod. Was this what love at first sight felt like? He shook his head. That was a thing of fairy tales and Disney movies. Maybe he'd eaten too much watermelon salad, and it was a case of indigestion. Which is it? Huh? You nodded, then shook your head. Going or staying? I figured we could hang out in the pool for a while, maybe play some video games before practice. Sure. His treacherous legs dragged him out of the house behind Will. Passing Molly and her friend on their way, he stumbled over his own feet. Perhaps that was wishful thinking. Perhaps he tripped over the not-so-thin air that hung between them, charged with secretive glances and the inability to stop staring at his friend's sister. It was going to be a long summer. Finnegan, 17 years old, 8 weeks later. The unmistakable crunch of bone on bone rang out in the field as Finn's curled-up fist connected with his opponent's jaw. No one made Molly Morrison cry on his watch. Her mascara-smudged cheeks, red-rimmed, sad eyes, and quiet demeanour would be etched into his soul for as long as he lived. Her new boyfriend had cheated on her after only a month of dating with someone she knew from school. She walked into Chili's with her family for dinner and witnessed the two of them canoodling in a booth in the middle of the restaurant, not even attempting to hide their infidelity from public view. She hadn't stayed around. Breaking up with him at full volume, spine straight, shoulders squared, she looked like a fierce goddess, shooting daggers from her ferocious green eyes and spitting fire from her lips. Mrs. Morrison had sent Finn and Will after her while she placed a to-go order for dinner, and the striking gladiator deflated in front of his eyes when they caught up to her. He wanted to swoop her into his arms and dry her tears, to tell her that asshole ex of hers didn't deserve her time. He wanted to press her against his chest and tell her his heart beat only for her, and his very being burned with need to keep her safe forever. But he couldn't. So instead he was laying into one of his teammates under the guise of being like a big brother to her. Pretending he didn't want Will to sully his squeaky clean reputation or get dragged into a fight he might not win, he'd thrown the first punch. With each swing he tried to convince himself it was the truth, but under it all, he was a goner for Molly Morrison, and he had no idea how the fuck he was going to handle it when she found herself a new man. That's the prologue. Hope you enjoyed it. If you would like me to do this again, please put any book comment suggestions in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed yourself. See you later.